President Obama congratulated the Libyan people today after Muammar Gadhafi, Libya's dictator for 42 years, was killed and rebel fighters captured the regime's final stronghold, Gadhafi's hometown of Sirte. This afternoon, the president stood in the Rose Garden on the heels of yet another foreign policy success and explained how he did it.
Faced with the potential of mass atrocities and a call for help from the Libyan people, the United States and our friends and allies stopped Gadhafi's forces in their tracks. A coalition that included the United States, NATO, and Arab nations persevered through the summer to protect Libyan civilians. And meanwhile, the courageous Libyan people fought for their own future and broke the back of the regime. For nearly 8 months, many Americans have provided extraordinary service in support of our efforts to protect the Libyan people and to provide them with a chance to determine their own destiny. Our skilled diplomats have helped to lead an unprecedented global response. Our brave pilots have flown in Libya's skies. Our sailors have provided support off Libya's shores. And our leadership at NATO has helped guide our coalition. Without putting a single U.S. service member on the ground, we achieved our objectives. And our NATO mission will soon come to an end.
It took less than 8 months to overthrow a 42-year dictator who sponsored the killing of American civilians in a terror attack. It cost $1 billion. That is billion with a B. Not a single American life was lost in the battle. Meanwhile, deposing Saddam Hussein has cost and continues to cost the United States over $1 trillion, trillion with a T, and more than 4,000 American lives, and we are still there. But don't expect the Republicans to give this president any credit. Presidential frontrunner Mitt Romney ducked the question on the campaign trail in Iowa this morning.
I think it's about time. Gadhafi, a terrible tyrant that killed his own people and murdered Americans and others in the tragedy in Lockerbie. The world is a better place with Gadhafi gone.
Just a short time ago, Romney did better the second time around when he was asked again. Romney had a lot more to say about the president's handling of Libya on a conservative radio show in March.
He's tentative, indecisive, timid, and nuanced. He calls the removal of Muammar Gadhafi, but then conditions our action on the directions we get from the Arab League and the United Nations. America has been feared sometimes, has been respected, but today that America is seen as being weak. We're following the French into Libya.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida is willing to give credit to the French. Back in June, Senator Rubio didn't think the Europeans were up to the task.
Only when the Gadhafi mercenaries were on the outskirts of Benghazi, threatening to massacre thousands of innocent civilians, did the president finally agree to participate. But even that was botched. First, we ceded most of the operation over to our NATO allies, and God bless them for trying, but they do not have the military capability to finish the job.
But reacting to Gadhafi's death on Fox News this morning, Rubio was certain that it was the Europeans who finished the job.
I'm glad it's all working out. Ultimately, This is about the freedom and liberty of the Libyan people. But let's give credit where credit is due. It's the French and the British that led on this fight, and probably even led on this strike that led to Gadhafi's capture or to his death.
Such amateur guesswork could not survive this fast-moving news day. NBC News has learned that it was a U.S. Predator drone that fired on the 15-vehicle convoy carrying Gadhafi as he attempted to flee his hometown. Gadhafi escaped the attacked fleet and ran to a drain pipe where he was captured by rebel forces. It is not yet clear if he died from wounds from the airstrike or at the hands of his Libyan captors. Joining me now, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and host of MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell Reports. Steve Clemens, Washington Editor-at-Large for The Atlantic. Bobby Ghosh, Deputy International Editor for Time Magazine. And Eugene Robinson, columnist for The Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Andrea, this is scored by any measure as a victory for President Obama's strategy in Libya. He went out on a limb here at the start and took the position that they were going to have to move in Libya. We have now a lot of Republican videotape with a lot of embarrassing statements that do not square with where this situation is today. How do you grade the president's handling of this from start to today?
Well, I think that he has to be given good marks for this. He was criticized at first for not being in enough, for so-called leading from behind, for letting the British and the French take the lead. But I think he properly assessed that with us spread so thinly in two fighting wars already, that to join a third and to take a leading role, and we did take an important role in the initial airstrikes, but then we began focusing more on refueling intelligence and predator strikes, which turned out to be absolutely critical as the Civil War reached this point of hunting down Muammar Gadhafi. I think the Republicans have a lot of questions that still need to be addressed on the question of foreign policy, and they have not really been questioned very intensively on that subject. In the debate just the other night, they were talking about getting rid of foreign aid, which is only a small percentage of the budget, as you know, Lawrence, and getting out of the UN, according to Rick Perry. But this was a UN-NATO mission, and this is exactly the kind of coalition force that many people have been arguing we should be engaged in. And in this case, I think by any measure it worked. The question now is, what do the Libyans do next and what role we play? And that is another whole issue.
Let's listen to what the president said in his first address on Libya, March 29th, after ordering the airstrikes.
To be blunt, we went down that road in Iraq. Regime change there took 8 years, thousands of American and Iraqi lives, and nearly $1 trillion. That is not something we can afford to repeat in Libya.
Bobby Ghosh, do we see in Libya lessons learned from Iraq?
Yes, absolutely. I think the biggest lesson learned is you have to let the people do it by themselves. Take a backseat role, give them crucial help, as the NATO bombing operation provided, but let the people do it themselves. Whether or not the people of Iraq were in a position to do that against Saddam Hussein is a different story. But clearly, this had to be, from the beginning, something that the Libyan people did themselves. In that way, it's actually similar to what happened in Afghanistan back in 2001. This is like the Northern Alliance with American support, both on the ground and in the air. In that case, essentially
got rid of Taliban. In Afghanistan, although we instigated the action, the actual feet or boots, they weren't even boots, on the ground were native.
Yes, the Northern Alliance, a constellation of different tribes that had been fighting against the Taliban for a very long time, had local intelligence, local networks, local families. They were the sharp end of the operation.
Let's listen to what President Obama said today about American leadership in this mission in Libya.
We see the strength of American leadership across the world. We've taken out al-Qaeda leaders, and we've put them on the path to defeat. We're winding down the war in Iraq and have begun a transition in Afghanistan. And now, working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Steve Clemens, the president is trying to set this in the chapters of history that we're seeing unfolding in the Middle East. Where does this fit in the flow of, from, say, the invasion of Iraq all the way through the Arab Spring?
Well, we've seen President Obama hatch a new kind of American involvement. There were people like me that were concerned that we didn't know how to have this kind of war, that the Pentagon would see a slippery slope and would just simply get way over-engaged. And the president was able to hold back, give, as Bobby Ghosh just said, the rebels an opportunity to win or lose. This wasn't a guaranteed outcome. And I think this is a huge success for President Obama and a very new model that's different than Iraq, different than Afghanistan, and that builds upon a much more organic and authentic kind of revolution. The problem is President Obama and I think his team would really like to take a lot of credit for it, but the subtlety of this doesn't allow them to. I just walked by the White House, and, you know, in contrast to another great villain who President Obama killed, Osama bin Laden, there's no one there paying tribute or celebrating. This wasn't our villain in Libya. It was the people's villain, those in Tripoli. I have no doubt that someday Barack Obama will have a square in Tripoli named Barack Obama Plaza. But that's not going to be here, and I think the president and his team are wondering why they aren't getting more support. But this was their fight, and that was the mastery and the magic, I think, of what President Obama hatched in this.
So, Eugene Robinson, this was tactically, in some ways, a victory for subtlety, a victory for restraint, of military restraint. There was a way to go in there big. The president decided not to go in there big. He did not put troops on the ground. There's a long list of things he did not do, and in the end, he got his way.
He did get his way, and from the beginning, remember, we first went in ostensibly to protect Libyan civilians, but the logic of the intervention from the beginning was that Gaddafi had to go. And I think the innovation here is that the president and his military team found a way to use the Predator drones, to use our intelligence assets, to use that sort of, it's not soft power, but it's not boots on the ground, but to use that power toward the end of regime change, which we kind of denied at first, but that was the only way we were going to protect the civilians, is getting rid of Gaddafi.
Andrea Mitchell, is this, American presidents are frequently accused of going into military situations or going into war without saying fully what they really intend to do or why they're really going. Has Gene just touched on the possible version of a liberal president going to war, not really turning over all of his cards when he was doing it?
Well, I do think that there is a clear ambiguity, a deliberate ambiguity in the whole notion of letting Gaddafi out, letting him become an exile. I think everyone knew, especially with the role of the intelligence community and the predators, that we were targeting Gaddafi. And the fact that he was apparently executed without any due process today may have some ramifications, both domestically in Libya and in the Arab world. But no tears were shed for him in Washington or in Langley. But clearly, this was a kill option, and they were out to get him.
We're going to be back with more on Gaddafi and his tortured history with American presidents. The Republican president who wanted to kill him, and the Republican president who then made peace with him. But first, cameras were rolling in Afghanistan when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton read the first reports about Gaddafi on her BlackBerry.
Wow.
Unconfirmed.
Unconfirmed. Yeah. Unconfirmed. No. Unconfirmed reports about Gaddafi being captured.
Really?
Unconfirmed. Yeah, we've had too many. We've had a bunch of those before. We've had, you know, have had him captured a couple of times.